is being recorded as of now. So we'll make the recording available to all registrants after the webinar. Feel free to take your video off if you would like at this point. All attendees are muted by default to minimize background noise. If you're not muted, please do so. So that can help us with our session. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will address as many as we can during the Q&A portion that we have reserved at the end of the session, about 5-10 minutes. If you experience any technical issues, please let us know through the chat, and our team will do the best to assist you. And finally, we encourage you to stay engaged. And with that, we can get started. So I'm so glad you could join us today for this special information session on conservation psychology, hosted by UC San Diego Extended Studies. My name is Stefania Randazzo-Wright, and I'm a program manager in the Science and Sustainability departments at Extended Studies. Before we dive in, let me take a moment to introduce UC San Diego Extended Studies for those of you who may be new to our community. We're the continuing and professional education division at UC San Diego, offering practical, career-focused learning design for working adults. With over 4,900 courses and programs in everything from data science to the arts, we serve over 30,000 learners each year, helping individuals grow professionally, pivot careers, and make an impact in their communities. We're especially proud to offer accessible, flexible learning that reflects the most current knowledge in today's job market. Now turning to sustainability, today's topic is part of our Sustainability and Behavior Change Certificate, a program that is designed to help learners understand the psychological, social, and cultural drivers on behavior. Whether you're working in environmental policy, education, urban planning, or corporate sustainability, this program gives you the tools to design effective strategies for real-world impact. Conservation psychology is one of our most popular courses because it bridges science and empathy, helping us understand not just what needs to change in the world, but how we inspire people to act. So with that, I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator for today's session, Kayla Cranston. Kayla is one of our instructors in the certificate. She teaches co-designing conservation along with our conservation psychology class in partnership with Wesley Schultz, who is also our main guest speaker today. Kayla will be guiding our conversation today and helping us explore how conservation psychology can play a critical role in driving sustainable behavior. Kayla, I'll turn it over to you now.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Stefania. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Schultz and I are really pleased and honored to have all of you here to give you a little taste of what he and I like to call conservation psychology. That's what we're here to talk about today. Again, as Stefania said, it's a part of the Sustainability and Behavior Change Certificate at UCSD. It also just happens to be the field that my colleague here, Dr. Schultz, co-founded with a series of other individuals who are experts in the field of conservation psychology. So along with Dr. Schultz being a full research professor in the Division of Behavioral and Organizational Sciences at Claremont Graduate University, he also focuses and has focused for many decades, I believe, on conservation psychology and how we can really use the principles of social psychology to understand and solve environmental problems. He's going to dig into what that means today. Really excited to have him here. Very honored to be a part of this webinar. And I'm hoping that if you like it, you will be able to be interested in potentially taking our course, Conservation Psychology, where the content has been completely created 100% by Dr. Schultz, and I am the facilitator of the discussions that happen in that course. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to Dr. Wesley Schultz, and he's going to take it from here. Dr. Schultz.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kayla, and thank you, Stefania, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. We had such a great response to this. So Stefania had this crazy idea, hey, let's do a 45-minute free webinar. And Kayla and I said, sure, that sounds great. We'll talk about conservation psychology. We'll talk about the certificate program and so forth. And just blown away by the really strong interest in it. So thank you all for signing up and for joining us. We have 45 minutes, and I'm just going to give a quick overview about conservation psychology. And let me just start with a big picture. So we face a whole host of very serious and pressing environmental problems. This is a visual image from climate.gov, and it just shows trends in the average surface temperature of the Earth, and the change from 1994 to 2023. And I mean, one of the big things that jumps out is it's overwhelmingly red, right? So the temperature, surface temperature of the Earth is increasing. And this is over a very short period of time from 1994 to 2023. If you look over a longer period of time, so again, this is data from climate.gov, NOAA data, this goes back to 1880. And what you see is quite strikingly, the last 20 years have been substantially warmer globally than it has been in the past. And it seems quite clear that this is being driven by human behavior. And climate change is just one. I just picked this, but we faced a whole host of other very serious and pressing environmental issues: population growth, overconsumption, species extinction, pollution, deforestation. Basically, there are too many of us consuming too many natural resources and generating too much waste. Our current standard of living, our current lifestyles are not sustainable globally. Now, a lot of this comes from the field of biology, and biologists have looked at the connection between human behavior and environmental problems, and it's really the field of biology that says, hey, these are problems. They're the ones that tell us the environmental impact, the sustainability or unsustainability of human impact. And when we talk about conservation, then my argument is we're really a blend of biology and psychology. So on the biology side, biology is just the scientific study of living organisms. And within biology, then there's a field of conservation biology, well established, probably 40 years as a field. It's the branch of biology that deals with the effects of humans on the environment and with the conservation of biological diversity. And conservation biology has been offered on university campuses for many, many years. One of my colleagues where I work taught conservation biology, and his course took students to the point of understanding the connection between behavior and environmental impact. What are the things that we are doing that are causing these problems? Well, we drive too much. We use non-sustainable sources of energy. All of the different things, but then it stops right there. So this is how behavior affects biological diversity. And then he said, but now let's bring in somebody else who can talk about the behavioral side of things. So the biologist can tell us what behaviors need to change, but now creating those programs to change behavior, we need to tap into a different field, and that's where psychology comes in. So psychology as a field is the scientific study of behavior. Why do people do the things that they do, and how can we understand the drivers of those behaviors, and how can we change those behaviors? So within psychology, then, we set out to create a subfield of conservation psychology, the study of the reciprocal relationship between individuals and the natural environment. So how are individuals affected by nature? And then how do we change the behaviors so that we have a better impact, a more sustainable lifestyle? So that's really the field of conservation psychology. And like Kayla said in the introduction, I was part of early work to help found this area. A colleague of mine, Carol Saunders, led this effort about the emerging field of conservation psychology. And she represented it with this sort of these circles that show the intersection between biology and psychology. So conservation biology here on the left, you can see some of the topics. So ecology would fall within there, genetics, environmental monitoring, hazard evaluation. So understanding really the biological processes of environmental problems. And then here's conservation psychology. So now we're looking at human dimensions. We're looking at human ecology. We're looking at applications of psychology, organizational psychology, social psychology, consumer psychology, right? So tapping into the behavioral piece of it. So that's what we're going to focus on today. And that's what the course that I teach in conservation psychology covers, is a glimpse into the research that's in this field. Now, when we talk about conservation, I interpret conservation as behavior. When you say conserve, we as a society need to conserve, we're really saying we need to change behavior. We need to understand why people do the things they do, and how can we create programs and strategies to understand and change that behavior. So this paper and other papers that I've cited in here, we're happy to provide the links to them, and you can read the depth of it if you want to. But I'm going to dig into just two pieces, two recent papers, and then highlight some examples from conservation psychology. So in thinking about conservation then, and thinking about human behavior, my argument is that human behavior is the primary cause of environmental problems. So if you look back at that list that I had about climate change, pollution, natural resources, basically that we consume too much and we generate too much waste. So how can we change behavior then? So changing behavior is central to a sustainable future. And these are the primary ways that we see efforts to promote more sustainable futures. And so one is through technology. So creating more efficient ways of using energy, or more efficient ways of generating, using, and disposing of raw materials. So technology is seen as a pathway towards sustainability, but it still requires behavior. People need to adopt the technology. People need to use the technology in efficient ways. So as an example, you can think about Energy Star certified appliances. So this is the US Environmental Protection Agency, their program to certify particular appliances as more efficient. So they use less water, they use less energy to produce the same output. So a washing machine, for example, a dishwasher, a refrigerator. But there are many examples where a person buys an Energy Star certified appliance, but then uses it inefficiently. So they believe that they've already done their part by buying the appliance, but now they go about using it in inefficient ways. And the end result is actually more consumption, the use of more resources. So even though you've got the technology, people have to still change their behavior. Policies and laws. So we can pass laws and regulations that apply to different patterns of behavior. But again, people have to vote for it. They have to support it. They have to comply with these policies and laws. Again, it's behavior. Structural investments. So we need to make the sustainable option more convenient, easier, more available, more accessible. But again, people have to support those investments, and then they have to choose to do it. And then a big one is around encouraging voluntary actions. And that's where much of conservation psychology falls, is not necessarily the technology or the laws or the investments and the finances, but how do you convince people, or how do you create a program that people choose to participate in? Now, thinking about human psychology, we are evolved to survive in a world that no longer exists. Basically, we are a primitive individual in a modern body. That is, the things that we're evolved to survive in, threats that no longer exist, but yet this is who we are. This is how we process information. This is what drives our behavior. This is a paper that I wrote a few years back called Harnessing Stone Age Biases to Foster Environmental Behavior. Basically, the proposal here is that understanding our evolved human nature can help us to understand why we do the things that we do. Why are we in this environmental predicament that we find ourselves in? Now, I just want to highlight a couple of things from this piece. So this is a table from the paper that highlights these psychological biases that underlie environmental practice and environmental issues. So there are 5 here. And each of these is elaborated, and I'll just briefly mention them because it's these Stone Age biases that have led us to where we are today. So self-interest. So we tend to prioritize personal over collective interests. That is, evolutionarily, we needed to prioritize our own survival in order for us to pass along our genetic material. We have to prioritize personal over collective interest. Now, that's not to say we don't share a collective interest, because certainly we live in groups, we're quite social, and so collective interests overlap with our personal interests. But given the choice, overwhelmingly, we will choose personal gain over collective gain. Short-sightedness. We value the present more than the future. Again, thinking to the constraints or the threats that we face historically, we needed to think about here and now, to prioritize the things that were right in front of us. Sure, we think about the future, we have to prepare a bit for the future, but that's a problem for tomorrow. If something is a threat to me today, right here, right now, I need to respond. And so there's this short-sighted bias. Status. We tend to value relative status over absolute status. That is, it's most important to me that I have status within my group rather than that I have absolute status outside of my group. And so we care more about the people that are immediately around us than we do about a broader, more diffuse collective group. Building on that status idea, this idea of social imitation, we copy what other people around us are doing. It's a very effective strategy. If people are doing it and it's working for them, then we should do it too. A lot of times when we're faced with a decision to make, what's the first thing that we do? Well, we look around to see what other people are doing. Thinking about my work at the university, when I give the results for an exam and a student gets their exam back, what's the first thing that they do? They look to the others that are around them. How did you do? How did you do? They're more interested in comparing their performance to others than in the absolute overall performance. And then finally, number 5 of these biases, then, sensory mechanisms. We tend to ignore threats that we can't see, smell, or touch. Threats that are very present right here, right now. I can see it, I can smell it, I can touch it. Those are the things that I respond to. More distant threats, I'm less interested. I'll pay some attention to it, but I'm more motivated in dealing with the things that are right in front of me. Now, these are very effective strategies. We've made it quite far as a species using these strategies, but they also are the foundation for these environmental problems that we face. All right, so now let me turn my attention to solutions. And this is a forthcoming piece. It will appear in a journal called Trends in Cognitive Sciences. It's 90% done. I was hoping it would be 100% done by the time I did this presentation, but so you get a sneak peek to this forthcoming piece, which I'll certainly incorporate into my course. But the idea is, let's look at what's working. Scalable solutions to environmental problems, psychological approaches at work. And here in this piece, I'm highlighting what I see as solutions that can really be effective. These are scalable solutions that can be developed and deployed and that are likely to have substantial success. And I'll just walk through them, and then I want to give some very specific examples of these. So the first one on my list is nudges. And nudges are subtle changes in what economists call the choice architecture. That is the environment in which you make a decision. And these subtle changes steer people toward more sustainable behaviors without restricting their options. And I'll give an example in a moment. Number two on my list here are social norms. Again, looking at that idea of imitation and relative status, interventions that emphasize what other people do or what other people approve of doing can be successful at promoting changes in behavior. The third on my list is education. And here we find some evidence, although I would say the education literature is very weak here, but some evidence that providing factual information can increase knowledge about environmental issues, and in some cases can lead to changes in behavior. There are some issues with education, and we can talk about those, but I think it is a scalable solution. Next on my list, use of economic incentives or disincentives can motivate environmental friendly choices. And number five is contact with nature, providing experiences with nature to foster connection. And I think all five of these, there's a good scientific literature that we can look at for examples of how successful have these been, and maybe what are some of the cognitive processes that can underlie them. So some of the reasons that they're effective, or maybe instances where they're not effective. Now, let me just give a couple of examples of these different scalable solutions. So I mentioned nudge. Nudge was the first one that I listed about changing the architecture in which a person makes a decision. And here I want to highlight defaults, the power of defaults. So these are preset choices that take effect if the person does nothing. So a good example of this, and this is not an environmental example, but organ donations. So when you, let's say, get your driver's license and you're at the DMV, you'll have an option to opt in to make an organ donation in the event of your demise. So if you're in a car accident and you're deceased, you say, yes, it's okay, you can use my organs and I'll donate them to save somebody else's life. And in that situation, we see opt-in rates of around 12%. But another strategy would be opt-out. So we've already defaulted you in, but if you choose to remove yourself, just click here. If you do with the opt-out strategy, only 1% will opt out. So you end up with 99% of people in this organ donation program if you use an opt-out strategy versus 12% if you use an opt-in. Basic idea is that by doing nothing, you remain with the default option. Now let's apply this to an environmental area, and maybe you're already thinking about ways that this could be applied to environmental behaviors, but here's one about green energy. So this was a study that came out of Switzerland, and the Swiss offered their customers the option of selecting to get their energy from a wind energy source. But the wind energy had an added cost of about 5%, right? So if you think about, okay, what's my electric bill? I pay about $100 a month, and so it's going to cost me $5 extra. And they offered this to all of the customers, and they had an opt-in rate of 3%. So 3% of the Swiss people that were offered this said, yeah, I'll pay an additional 5% to get wind instead of a traditional energy. But when they used an opt-out strategy, 90% remained in the program. That is, 10% of them opted out. And if you look out 5 years later, the opt-in approach had 3%. So over that 5-year period, 5% of the people had said, yes, I want that. Whereas if they used an opt-out approach, 80% had the green energy by default. So thinking about ways that we can make the environmental option the default option, not constraining choice, because everybody still had the choice. You could opt out. That's not an issue here. Everybody has the same choice. It's just what's the default. And you see these huge differences depending on how you frame it. All right, a second example, and this one is using that social norms scalable approach that I mentioned. We've seen that humans are very social by nature. We live in groups. We care what people in our group think of us. We're influenced by the behaviors of people in our group. If you look at something like rooftop solar panels, so these are photovoltaics, and you look within a particular city or a community, the deployment of these rooftop solar panels isn't random. It's not that one is here and one is here and one is here. What happens is somebody gets rooftop solar, and the other homes that are around that person are now influenced by it. They're interested. I see that you got that solar on your roof. How's it working for you? How much did it cost you? How much are you saving? Is it something that I should consider? And so you see this contagion effect where one person getting it spreads to the others that are around them. Similarly with recycling. So if you look at the set out rates for bins on recycling day, again, it's not random. One person's bin at the curb exerts influence on the other nearby residents, and they copy it. There's a great story of a person who was leaving their house going to work. They get in their car, they drive out of their driveway, they get into the street, and they realize, they see that their neighbors have put out the recycling bins. It's recycling day. They drive back into the driveway, get their bin from the garage, and put it at the curb. But the bin is empty. It's not that it reminded them, I have recyclables that need to be put out. It's that for this person, they didn't want to be left out. They didn't want their neighbors to think of them as somebody who didn't care about the environment. It was important to them to be part of their group. And so they were influenced by that set out of the bins. So let's think about ways then that we can use this information. Let me come back to this for a second. How can we use then this pressure that we have to fit in with our group to promote changes in behavior? And this is a project that I worked on related to household electricity use. And in California at the time, we were facing some pretty serious availability issues in terms of electricity. And so there were rolling brownouts or blackouts where you would just be told by your utility, we're sorry, there's not enough electricity to go around, so we're going to shut off your neighborhood. You're not going to have electricity for however many hours. And so the utilities were interested in seeing different strategies that could be used to reduce overall household electricity consumption. And the things that they did were pretty typical. So these are things that we often see when organizations are trying to promote environmental behavior. So one is they appeal to social responsibility, right? Do your part to conserve energy for future generations. Or they appeal to environmental protection. So protect the environment by conserving energy. Or they appeal to self-interest. Now, importantly, this is not changing the cost, because changing the cost was one of my scalable solutions that I think will work. They just highlighted the cost, which is a very different and typically ineffective strategy. So this is what we see quite commonly, and these are the ones that we tested. So social responsibility, environmental protection, or self-interest. But then we wanted to compare these with a new one that we created, which was around this idea of social norms or group identity. Join your neighbors in conserving energy. And we highlighted the fact that other people in your neighborhood are doing things to reduce their electricity consumption. So it's a very different type of message, but one that is consistent with that idea that we're social by nature. We want to look, what are other people doing? Maybe I should do that too. We printed these on door hangers, and we went around to houses and we put these messages on the front door, and then we monitored to see how much electricity each house used in the subsequent days after we put these on their front door. And our results look like this. So this figure shows then the average kilowatt hours used per day. So these are kilowatts. They're not really intuitive numbers, but more kilowatts means they use more electricity. And then these are the different types of messages that we tested. So this is the self-interest, which was how much money you can save. This was social responsibility, so do your part for future generations. This was the social norm. This was environmental protection. And then this was our control condition. And what you see is that the only one that reduced consumption relative to the control was our social norm message. It was an 8% overall reduction in household electricity consumption. So the ones that were tested and ones that are commonly used, environmental protection, social responsibility, look at the money you can save, they didn't work. The social norms message did work at reducing electricity consumption. All right, one more example here. So let's take this idea now and put it into practice in a different context. So this was a field implementation that we did with a local resort here in San Diego County. And the resort, like many hotels, had this towel reuse program. So they wanted guests who stayed in the hotel to use their towels more than once. So you stay in a hotel room, you use your towel one time, you throw it on the floor. Now the cleaning staff has to change it. There's water issues, there's resource issues with soap and so forth. There's all sorts of energy issues. So if we can get people to reuse their towels, that's going to save resources then going forward. And they created a message which is probably similar to what you've seen in other hotels: help us conserve our natural resources. Now, on my list of 5 scalable solutions, appealing to environmental protection was not one of them. In fact, consistently we find in conservation psychology research that these types of appeals generally don't change behavior. So we wanted to try a different message. These were the hotel rooms or the resort rooms. You can see they're quite nice at this beach resort. And our new one used this social message. Many of our guests have expressed to us their approval of conserving energy. When given the opportunity, nearly 75% of hotel guests choose to reuse their towels each day. Because so many guests value conservation and are in the habit of conserving, this hotel has initiated a conservation program. And so we printed these and put them in close proximity to the bath towels in the bathroom. And then we worked with the cleaning staff to count how many of the towels came out of these rooms if it had the environmental message or if it had the social message. Our results look like this. So here's the control message. That's the environmental message. This is the number of towels that were taken out of each room. You can see it ranged from 1 to 2. And then this is our norm message. It was a 25% reduction in the number of towels that were used or replaced in each room. Now, this idea, I think at last is starting to get picked up. So I recently stayed at a Hilton property, and this was the towel reuse message that greeted me in my bathroom at the Hilton. The majority of our guests reuse their towel at least once during their stay. So I say, great job, yes, right? So it's not necessarily telling you that it's the socially responsible thing or the environmental thing. It's saying, hey, other people do it. So a nice extension of the research findings that we had. A bunch of references. You saw a lot of the papers that I cited in there, and I'm happy to provide those links. And with that, I will conclude, and we have a little bit of time for some questions. So,
Yes, we
Kayla, I
do.
know you were
Absolutely.
moderating.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm hoping my camera doesn't make things weird, but I can turn it off if necessary. So thank you, Wes. That was amazing. It looks like everybody was really thinking deeply about everything you were talking about because they have some really awesome questions. And I want to start, I think, with this last one that I'm really excited to get your thoughts on. So the question is, what value do you think should be placed on early education about conservation and sustainability?
Yeah, it's a great question. Um, I mean, it's when you ask people, what can we do to address environmental problems? Education comes up usually as the first one that people think of. But then they say, well, it's not me, it's not adults, it's children, right? So it's sort of the idea that, well, the old dog, they're already set in their ways. You can't change them. We should just forget about the older people. It's really the youth that we need to reach because the youth are impressionable. We can influence them, and then they'll have a lifetime of changes. This basic theory, the idea of impressionable youth, has been with us since the beginning of the environmental movement back in the 1960s. You all are a product of this efforts to educate the youth. I would say by and large, it has failed. And I'm pretty critical, as you see, of environmental education. I think it can work, and I think there are some really good examples of it working, but it's unlikely to work in a classroom with a teacher telling you about environmental issues. The instances where it seems to work the best is when children have an opportunity to touch and smell and hear and engage with nature, right? Going back to the idea of contact with nature as one of my scalable solutions, that type of environmental education can have really strong and lasting effects. So yes, I think there's a place for it. And yes, I think, reaching youth, reaching kids with an environmental message is important, but we just can't lecture and teach it in a hypothetical situation. I think it really has to be experienced and personal and create this sense of connection, connectedness with nature.
That's right. That's right. And we do in our course go over a little bit about that when it comes to, I think we talk about Louise Chawla's work on that.
Hmm.
So if anybody is interested in looking more into that, I'm just going to pop her name in the chat in case you all want to run off and look up more work on what does work developmentally in that realm for
Yeah.
conservation psychology. Any other suggestions, Wes, on
I
that?
like that, Kayla, the
Yeah.
connection to Louise Chawla, because I mean, her work really shows that spending time in nature
Mhm.
is predictive of conservation later in life. So that
That's right.
children who spend time in nature, and it's spending time in nature with a significant other, with somebody in your life who's important to you, that those experiences can have lasting, lifelong impacts. And so I think that's a great example. And she has some good, accessible books that are on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We have a question about very interesting topic, wanted to know more about it and where and how. And I am happy to put some information in the chat to help you kind of get to the page where you would sign up to learn more and how. More about how to do all of this. There was one more general question. I know we only have a few more minutes left, but the question is comfort and its relation to affluence. Seems like a strong pull that prevents individuals from engaging in resource efficient behaviors. So I can see why including statistics specific to the demographic in each setting is more effective in nudging environmentally conscious behavior. I suppose that was just more of a comment than a question, but it makes sense.
No, but it's a good one. Yeah, it's a great point, right? The idea of comfort, and that I think implied there is that when we ask people to do the environmental thing, a lot of times we're asking them to sacrifice, that it's going to be painful if you do it. It's going to cost you more if you eat that way. That the environmental choice is seen as the sacrificial one, but I don't think it has to be that way. And I think finding examples where making the environmental choice is better for you, right? And I think living simply, a lot of people really resonate with that, right? The idea that having less stuff will make your life simpler. Yeah, I love that. Like, I think when you talk to people, so many of us would agree, yes, I want that, right? I want that. I don't want the stress and the difficulty of having all of this stuff. How can I make it simpler? So finding ways that we can frame it in a positive way, rather than saying, you need to be the deviant one who is sweaty and has an ugly yard and drives a really lame vehicle. You can ride your bike if you want, but the rest of us, we're going to be living the comfort life. Like, that's not a very compelling message. So finding ways that you can frame it in a way that's beneficial and resonates with what people value and what they want. So my view is more, we don't need to change the person. We need to change the situation and the context in which the behavior occurs. And if you think about all of those 5 scalable solutions, maybe with the exception of education, right? The nudge, you still have a choice. It's just changing the architecture. You talk about social norms. It's just highlighting the fact that other people are with you. You're not alone. There's a community of people who value these things and who do these things. Looking at those strategies, then really it's just changing the context more so than it is trying to convince people that they need to be more sacrificial, right? Which really goes against those Stone Age biases that we have. So I think it's a great question and a great point.
Yeah, they just keep getting better and better. I've got 2 here that are actually rather close to each other. So I think I'm gonna kind of say them both and you can decide which way you want to answer this. But the question I have is, how do you influence behavior when social pressures are pushing individuals towards less sustainable actions? And I think you've answered a little bit about that with your talk of, talk about simplicity as opposed to sustainability. And then the kind of next question that was similar is, I was wondering, for changing attitudes and behaviors towards animals, especially animals whose presence do not benefit human beings, what sort of approaches work, and what kind of storytelling / media work best in changing attitudes and behaviors in that regard?
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, it is the case that many of these things that we were advocating for sustainability purposes aren't common, right? They start off relatively uncommon, eating vegetarian meals. And so how then can you honestly communicate these messages
Mhm.
when other people aren't doing them.
Mhm.
And I think there's some really good examples here where it's not necessarily the absolute number of people that are doing it, but it's the change, it's the
Mhm.
trend, it's the momentum of these behaviors. So yes, only 10% of the population eats primarily a vegetarian meal, but that's way up. Like this is a growing trend, the number of people who are choosing to eat vegetarian. So yes, okay, 10% is a small number,
Mm.
but it's a huge movement. So
Mhm.
highlighting that change over time, I think, can be really effective.
Yeah.
And similarly, yes, a small number of people are doing it, but look at who they are, right? This
Mm.
idea of status is really
Mhm.
compelling to us. I want to be part of the the high status community within my group. So it's the individuals that are doing it as well. So both of those pieces can have really strong effects, even if the norm isn't on your side and you already have 70, 80, 90% of the people doing it. So really good question.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And just
Kayla,
some,
I noticed that we're pushed up against time. I want to be mindful of everybody's time.
yeah, absolutely. So Stefania gave me a backdoor message that we actually have 10 minutes, about 10 minutes if you want to stay on. We can do that or we can wrap up. It's up to you.
No, I'm happy to stay on.
Okay, great.
I don't know, Stefania, did you want to say
So
anything about the?
I have just 2 minutes at the end to wrap it
Okay.
up. So you guys,
Yeah.
yeah, if you want to keep
All
going,
right.
maybe two
Yeah.
more questions.
We can do one
Yeah.
or two more. And before we do that, I just wanted to pop in. There was somebody who asked about the towards animals and all of that. I want to pop in the chat, and I'll do that in response to somebody's message, a link that's going to take you directly to a training that is being offered on that in September that I'm going to be doing in person in Colorado at a conference. So if you are interested in that, I'm going to pop that in there, and it'll tell you a little bit more about that human wildlife conflict aspect of things. And so let's look. Recently attended a okay. Depend on daily life. So right, right. These are really good questions. So can you talk a little, this is an interesting one. Can you talk a little bit about how the prevalence of greenwashing has impacted or undermined behavior change?
Yeah. So, I mean, greenwashing is the idea that corporate America, in their effort to market their products, have basically lied about the environmental benefits of the things that they're selling, right? So they've
Mhm.
greenwashed it. They've taken something that they're already selling, and then they're trying to convince you that, hey, this is really the environmental choice. I mean, on the one hand, it's interesting that buying a product is the environmental choice, right? In some ways, buying product is the problem. And so now selling products as a solution, I think, is sort of antithetical. But we'll set that aside. We'll say, all right, did it undermine trust? I think absolutely it undermined trusts because people came to recognize those brands as deceptive, and they didn't want to be part of that particular brand. I think what I've seen more recently is a much more authentic effort by many companies to align their products with an environmental and sustainable consumer base, recognizing that people want to make environmental choices. We recognize that the things we buy and how we spend our money has a big impact. And we want to choose products and choose to spend our money in ways that can have, I don't want to say a more sustainable, but a less harmful environmental impact. And so I've actually
Mhm.
seen more in terms of like authentic efforts by companies to align with that. And I think it's a good thing because they're actually using more sustainable sources in their manufacturing. They're trying to do more to reduce their carbon emissions from transportation. Like, yes, there's still a big problem and there are still huge changes that need to be made. But I'm seeing a
Mhm.
more realistic attempt by corporations to align. And what I think that means is that we've been successful. Like our attempt to move away from companies that we see as greenwashing really did affect their bottom line, and they see that they need to be serious about it and not just say that they're going to do something. So I think it did undermine trust, and I think that's a serious problem, but I think we also responded to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm noticing a lot of questions, Wes, in our chat that just speak to the depth of this topic and the fact that 60 minutes is just not going to be enough to answer all of the deep questions that really need to be answered about this. So I am actually going to post in the chat the website that you all would go to if you're interested in signing up for the class that goes deeper into this exact topic with Dr. Schultz, with myself. And if you're interested, we do go into all of this. We talk about how it impacts different aspects. So travel, right? Resources, water, things like that. So it's really, it goes more in depth into that. And with that, I'm realizing that, oh, we're running into Stefania's time. Stefania, do you want to
Thank you,
finish
Kayla.
up?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think this is a perfect segue to wrap it up and maybe give back a couple minutes to all of our participants. So thank you so much to our speakers, Wes and Kayla, for participating and sharing all this incredible knowledge. We hope that you all found it insightful and inspiring, and that it sparked new ideas for learning and for action, perhaps. So as a reminder, what Kayla was just mentioning, we have our certificate in sustainability and behavior change. All our courses are offered quarterly, giving you an opportunity to participate in them up to 4 times a year. You can find a lot of information on the website, and I'm always happy to connect with any of you if you'd like to learn more. Our next webinar in this series will take place on Wednesday, June 25th. So about a month from today, and we'll feature Jennifer Tabanico, who is one of our instructors in the certificate also. She teaches the Behavior Change for Sustainability course within the certificate program. I'll be sending a follow-up email in the coming days with more details about the certificate and the upcoming session, so please keep an eye out for that. The next classes in the certificate will run in our summer quarter. So conservation psychology will kick off on July 14th. And we have another class that Kayla teaches, which is co-designing conservation, which kicks off on July 7th. So again, I'll reach out to all of you with an email, so feel free to respond or ask any more questions. Again, thank you so much for attending, and we wish you a great rest of your day, and thanks again for being with us.
Thank you, everybody. That was really great. Appreciate the questions.
Thanks, everyone.